This week, we are going to investigate different forms of literature. I'm going to guess that most of you are familiar with at least one type of literature. Literature, in many ways, forms the basis for other forms of media that we enjoy, including films, television shows, and video games. There are many types of literature, and this list does not capture them all. Fiction can take on either realistic or fantastic qualities. While a work of fiction may mirror or mimic real life, it is made up. Fiction includes novels, short stories, and to some extent, poetry. Nonfiction works are those that may occur. However, to fill in the gaps, there could be elements of fiction to fill in the blank. For example, theories. Nonfiction works include biographies, essays, and sacred texts. Finally, we have drama. Drama is often a play or it's meant to be performed. It can be fiction, nonfiction, or a combination. I won't cover drama here, as we will discuss that when we go over film and theater next week. There are lots of terms, and many of these should look familiar from the past weeks and from other courses you've completed. We will cover point of view, tone, appearance/reality, character, plot, theme, symbols, language, structure, sound structures, meter, facts, and anecdotes. Point of view is the perspective from which the literature, fiction, is presented. Spore discusses 3 types in the book, but there are actually 4 types. In first person singular, the literature is presented through the eyes of a character in the literature using me, myself, and I. Second person is not mentioned in Spore, but it does exist, and it's usually avoided. It can be used in fiction to break the fourth wall, for example, Deadpool, or as part of the choose your own ending genre. It is typically avoided as it can be awkward and difficult to manage. Third person singular is when the literature is presented by following a single character, but me, myself, and I are not used in the narration. Third person omniscient occurs when the narrator may follow and present the viewpoint of many characters in the work. Tone is the atmosphere and attitude presented in the story. This may use the setting or background elements to present a deeper meaning. And then with appearance and reality, the material in the fiction will have the appearance of being real. Even the fantastic can give the impression of being real. For example, the events in the Harry Potter series didn't really happen, but the elements of both fact and fiction work together to make the different elements realistic. Next, we have character and plot. About character, Spore writes that character means the psychological spine of individuals, the driving force that makes them respond the way they do when faced with a given set of circumstances. A character in a novel, play, short story, or poem needs to be more than short, tall, thin, heavy, male, or female. The character needs emotional and psychological depth. When developing a character, the author must consider, are they good or bad? Do they face a moral dilemma? What is their general disposition? Are they in crisis? Plot functions almost like the backbone of a fictional work. Where is the story going? What action will occur? How is everything related? There are 2 types of plots. Closed plots have a clear starting point, middle point, or rise, climax, and a clear ending or resolution. Open plots have a resolution, but it's up to the reader to think about where that resolution leaves the character. Themes and symbols are next. A theme works almost like the thesis of a work. A theme is the overall main idea behind a piece. Next, we have symbols. We often refer to the symbolism of an object within a work. This is the meaning behind an otherwise ordinary object, action, or adjective. These often give clues to a character's disposition or motives. These may point toward a larger picture or meaning within a work. Next up are language and structure. Language includes many factors. Spore attributes these to poetry, but they apply to both. Rhythm is similar to rhythm in music. This is the overall flow of sound through accents and syllables. Imagery can be literal or figurative. This is representation in a work. Figures give words and ideas additional meaning outside of the norm. Think figurative. A metaphor is a figure of speech that is implied but not explicit in creating a comparison. Symbols in poetry are used to express meaning. Personification gives objects or other beings human-like qualities. Hyperbole is overly exaggerated speech. Allegory uses symbols and other elements to represent another idea. Finally, structure refers to the physical structure of a poem or other work. Sound structure and meter apply mostly to poetry. Sound structures create patterns and sounds within a poem. These structures are ones you are probably familiar with. Rhyme, which is the act of placing similar sounding words together. For example, man and plan, cooking and looking, and antelope and cantaloupe. Alliteration is a grouping of words that start with the same sound, like the nursery rhyme and tongue twister, Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. Assonance is using similar vowel sounds, but the consonant sounds don't necessarily repeat. For example, the A sound in cats nap a lot. Finally, there's consonance, which repeats consonant sounds, like the C or K sound in Brock sat on a rock under a cotton tree to avoid shucking corn. Meter is a type and number of rhythmic units in a line of poetry. Spore breaks this down well, but don't worry about memorizing all the terms and numbers involved. Facts and anecdotes. Facts are the true details surrounding an event. Ideally, these can be easily verified, but not always. Often, facts include logical conclusions that are drawn to fill in unknown areas. Anecdotes are short stories used to create interest or illustrate a point. These often have additional details added for effect, or certain activities may be discussed hyperbolically. Literature, like many pieces of art and music, has staying power. In the next few slides, we'll touch on some famous works. Fiction includes novels, short stories, and poetry. Here I have some examples of each type, as well as lines that you may have heard outside of the literature. First are examples of novels, starting with Herman Melville's Moby Dick. Here is the opening line. Call me Ishmael, some years ago, never mind how long precisely. Next is the opening line from Life of Pi by Jan Martel, which reads, my suffering left me sad and gloomy. The lines from both set the tone in the novels early on. They hook the reader in. Short stories are just that, short stories. Many of you have probably at least heard of Poe's Gothic short story, The Telltale Heart. The story ends with the narrator confessing his crime to the police with, villains, I shrieked, dissemble no more, I admit the deed, tear up the planks. Here, here, it is the beating of his hideous heart. Kate Chopin's A Story of an Hour closes with the main character, Mrs. Mallard, becoming overcome with joy and elation at hearing her husband has passed. And yet she had loved him, sometimes, often she had not. What did it matter? What could love, the unsolved mystery, count for in the face of this possession of self-assertion, which she suddenly recognized as the strongest impulse of her being? Poetry can be long or short. Howl by Allen Ginsberg was actually turned into a biopic about Ginsberg. The first two lines open with, "I saw the best minds of my generation destroyed by madness, starving, hysterical, naked, dragging themselves through the Negro streets at dawn looking for an angry fix." Poetry can also evoke pain and compelling messages. Frances Ellen Watkins Harper was an African-American abolitionist, poet, and journalist during the 19th and early 20th centuries. Here she calls out the commonplace biblical defense of slavery in her poem, Bible Defense of Slavery. She writes, "A reverend man whose light should be the guide of age and youth brings to the shrine of slavery the sacrifice of truth." Nonfiction includes biographies, essays, and sacred scripture. A notable example of a biography would be The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks by Rebecca Skloot. Essays used to be written in lyrical format. This began changing when novels came to Western Europe and began to become popular in the 17th century. Now, essays are written in standard English. An excellent example is Virginia Woolf's The Modern Essay. Sacred scripture is considered nonfiction. Even if you don't ascribe to or believe in a certain religion, the sacred text of that religion is still nonfiction. Sacred texts hold the belief systems and tenets of the respective religions. These can be up to interpretation, and they are often revised. Most modern-day sacred texts are very different from their first iterations. The Bible, for example, has gone through many translations, and much of the original text cannot be translated easily. Other sacred texts include the Torah, the Quran, and the Ramayana. This is just a small sampling, as there are many, many other sacred texts. Before we close, I'd like to spotlight a novel. You can find a link to an informative website about the novel under this week's module, and I encourage you to take a look. You don't have to review the full module, but poke around and explore. Murasaki Shikibu's The Tale of Genji is the first novel ever written. It comes from the 11th century Japan during the Heian dynasty. At that time, it was taboo for women to write poetry, although Murasaki Shikibu did write her own poetry, and she included it in the novel. And writing down stories was even more taboo. We don't know her actual name because women were not permitted to share their real names outside of their families. Their fathers would know their names, and that information could be handed down to the woman's husband after the father died, typically. Murasaki Shikibu is actually a nickname meaning little purple flower. It's also the name of the main love interest of the novel's main character. The Western world did not embrace the novel for some time after. Eventually, it did make its way to the West, but it was considered crass or vulgar to read, much less read or write a novel. But after the Renaissance, it began to become popular. For context, novels did not exist in Shakespeare's England. There are some reading selections in the book that you will want to review when commenting on this week's discussion boards. Feel free to include your favorite pieces of literature as well.